I was sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Coleman's clinic, the smell of antiseptic and the buzzing of the fluorescent light, making the morning feel even heavier when my phone rang. The name on the screen was my daughter Bianca. For a moment, I felt a flicker of warmth, thinking she was calling to check on me. I pressed the phone to my ear. "Mom, we are leaving for Europe tomorrow. I already sold your beach house and your old truck. We needed the money. Goodbye." Her voice was flat, almost mechanical. And then, the line went dead. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I sat there with the phone pressed against my palm, my fingers trembling slightly. 41 years of raising her, of staying up at night, sewing dresses for school events, of saving every penny so she could go to college without loans, of cooking meals for her, even after she married Nolan, gone in a sentence shorter than a grocery list. The other patients coughed and shuffled their papers. A child sneezed, and his mother whispered a soothing word. But around me, the sounds blurred. I felt as though I had been dropped into a cavern, where my daughter's voice still echoed, sharp and cold. For a moment, I wanted to cry, but the tears never came. Instead, something else rose inside me, a quiet calm, like the tide pulling back before a storm. Because what Bianca did not know was that 6 months before, on a chilly October morning, my husband Gerald had placed a manila envelope into my hands. His voice was tired but steady. "Marjorie, keep this safe. If something ever happens to me, open it when you are ready." At the time, I tucked it into the bottom drawer of my dresser, too weighed down by grief after his funeral to think of anything else. I had not looked at it since. But now, in the stale air of the waiting room, his words surfaced with perfect clarity. Bianca believed she had stripped me of everything. She thought I was a discarded old woman, with no roof of my own and no car to drive. But Gerald had always been a man who planned beyond the horizon, and he had loved me enough to protect me even after his last heartbeat. When the nurse finally called my name, I stood and walked toward the exam room, each step slow but deliberate. I was no longer the abandoned mother Bianca imagined. I was a woman holding a secret that could shift the ground beneath us all. And for the first time since Gerald's death, I felt the faint stirrings of strength. I left Dr. Coleman's office later that morning. I did not head straight home. Instead, I wandered down Main Street past the bakery with its cinnamon sugar scent and the hardware store where Gerald once bought nails by the pound. My feet carried me without thought, as if they knew I needed to walk through the past before I could face the present. Every brick of this town holds the story of my sacrifices. I remembered the first year after Bianca was born. Gerald's paycheck as a bus driver barely covered rent, and I worked nights sewing uniforms at a textile factory. My fingers bled through the fabric, but I never stopped because every stitch was a promise that Bianca would never go hungry. I can still see her at 5 years old, running across our small front yard in hand-me-down sneakers I had scrubbed until the soles nearly tore apart. She looked up at me with bright eyes and asked, "Mommy, will we ever have a house by the sea?" At that moment, something inside me hardened into resolve. I wanted my daughter to grow up knowing that dreams could be built with sweat. Years later, when Bianca was 15, Gerald and I finally signed the papers for Seabrook Cottage, the small, cream-colored house that sat on the sand dunes just beyond the pier. It was not grand, but it was ours. We painted the porch ourselves, Gerald hammering each board, while I brushed strokes of white paint under the salty breeze. Bianca stood in the yard that day, her arms crossed, pretending to be unimpressed. But I saw her eyes soften when she thought we were not looking. Summers at Seabrook were our treasure chest of memories. I cooked clam bakes in the backyard, the smell of butter and lemon clinging to our clothes. Gerald grilled fish while Bianca brought her friends down to the water. She would laugh and splash her golden hair, catching the sunlight. Later, when Nolan appeared in her life, she brought him too. I welcomed him into our home, thinking I was extending the same love I had poured into raising her. But now, remembering those days was like pressing on a bruise. Every meal cooked, every sheet washed, every nail Gerald hammered into that house had been reduced by Bianca to a mere dollar sign. To her, it was never a sanctuary of family. It was a ticket to an adventure with a man who whispered promises louder than her own mother's love. I walked until my legs ached, then sat on a bench by the river. The water shimmered, and I thought of Gerald again. His steady hands, his quiet faith that hard work was enough. He had trusted me to keep our family together. Yet here I was, betrayed by the very child we had sacrificed everything for. The manila envelope waited in my dresser drawer like a locked door. My heart pounded with both fear and anticipation. Whatever Gerald had hidden inside was no longer just a secret. It was my only weapon, and soon I would need it. That evening, when the cicadas hummed outside my window and the shadows stretched long across the carpet, I finally pulled open the bottom drawer of my dresser. My hands shook as I lifted out the manila envelope Gerald had pressed into my palms 6 months before his heart failed him. It was heavier than I remembered, as if it had been absorbing all the weight of my grief, waiting for this moment. I sat on the edge of our bed, the quilt I had stitched years ago rough beneath my fingers. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the ticking of the old mantel clock. I traced Gerald's handwriting across the front of the envelope, my name Marjorie, written in those careful strokes that always leaned just slightly to the right. It felt as if his hand was guiding mine even now. I broke the seal and slid the papers onto my lap. Deeds, bank certificates, investment statements, the names of properties I had never heard of. My breath caught in my chest as I spread them out across the quilt. For years, Gerald had been a bus driver working long shifts coming home, smelling of diesel and dust. I thought every dollar he saved went into Bianca's tuition, our mortgage, the weekly groceries. Yet here in my hands was evidence that my husband had built an empire quietly, steadily, without ever boasting. There were 6 property deeds, one for a downtown condominium, another for a motel along the coast, several small houses in the city, and then a 20-story apartment building whose name chilled me. Harborview Towers. I whispered it aloud, my lips trembling. That was the very building where Bianca and Nolan lived. I read further. Harborview Holdings, a company registered in Gerald's name, later transferred fully to mine. My heart pounded. Bianca had called me worthless, had stolen what she thought was all I had left, while living inside walls her father had secured for me. There was a letter folded neatly among the papers. My dear Marjorie, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer beside you. Please forgive me for keeping these secrets, but I wanted to shield you from worry and from Bianca's ambitions. She has always been easily swayed, and I feared if she knew her love would change. You must know this now. You are safe, you are secure, and everything I built is yours. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Safe, secure, mine. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling the paper crinkle against my blouse, and for the first time since his passing, I felt his presence. Bianca thought she had robbed me of everything. She believed I would be left to shrink in silence. But in truth, I was the owner of far more than she could imagine. The beach house she sold illegally. The truck she dismissed as junk. The very roof over her head. I folded the papers, carefully slid them back into the envelope, and whispered to the empty room. Thank you, Gerald. You left me more than wealth. You left me the means to fight back, and I would. The next morning, I tucked the envelope back into my dresser drawer and dressed with more care than I had in months. I chose my burgundy dress, the one Gerald always said made me look dignified, and brushed my silver hair until it shone in the sunlight streaming through the curtains. If I was going to fight, I would not look like a beggar. With the papers folded neatly into my handbag, I took the bus downtown to the office of Elena Klein, the lawyer who had handled Gerald's modest will. She greeted me with a warm smile, but when I placed the documents on her mahogany desk, her expression sharpened. Mrs. Hale, this changes everything. These deeds, these certificates, they are all valid. Harborview Holdings is registered in your name. You are the rightful owner of all of it. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. Then, we must move quickly, Elena. My daughter believes she sold my beach house and my truck. I want them back. Elena nodded, her pen scratching across a legal pad. She explained that the sale of the beach house was illegal since Bianca had no authority. The property was still mine, and the buyers would be forced to return it once the fraud was exposed. The truck was trickier. Bianca had tricked me into signing a power of attorney under the guise of funeral arrangements granting her temporary control. Still, Elena believed we could prove deception. For the first time in months, I felt like a general preparing for battle. When I returned home, I played my part as the frail widow. I brewed a small pot of tea, sat on the porch, and let the neighbors see me as pitiful. Mrs. Patel from across the street waved sympathetically and asked if I needed groceries. I smiled weakly and said I will manage. Inside, though, my heart burned with a secret fire. At night, I spread Gerald's papers across the kitchen table, tracing the lines of his handwriting, memorizing every number, every clause. Each signature was a lifeline, each property a fortress. Bianca thought she had stripped me bare, but she had only peeled back the skin to reveal the steel beneath. 2 weeks later, Elena called. Mrs. Hale, I have news. The sale of Seabrook Cottage has been nullified. The buyers never knew it was fraudulent, so they are getting their money back. I walked to the window and gazed toward the horizon, where the sea lay miles away, hidden but eternal. The house Gerald and I had built with sweat and summers, with laughter and tears, was mine once more. The truck would take longer, Elena warned, but she was confident. I trusted her. That night, as I stood in the quiet kitchen, I whispered to Gerald's photograph on the mantel. The first piece is back, my love. She thought she left me with nothing, but the game has only begun. The following weeks settled into a strange rhythm, as if I were living two lives stitched together by the same thread of silence. By day, I played the role of the abandoned widow. I walked slowly to the corner store with my cloth bag, nodding politely to neighbors who offered me sympathetic smiles. I let them believe I was barely scraping by, clutching the handle of my bag as if every grocery dollar were a burden. At church on Sundays, I sat quietly in the last pew, eyes downcast, while whispers about Bianca's trip to Europe floated through the aisles. But by night, after the street lamps flickered on and the town settled into sleep, I became someone else. In the soft glow of the kitchen lamp, I spread Gerald's documents across the table, a queen surveying her hidden kingdom. Deeds, shares, bank statements, the silent testimony of a man who had trusted me to carry on his fight. My pen scratched across notepads as I mapped out what belonged to me and how to reclaim every stolen inch. Elena called often with updates. The cottage was secure. The truck's case was moving forward. The apartment building Harborview Towers was still tangled in administrative knots. But she assured me it was only a matter of time before my control was absolute. And yet in the daylight hours, I wore the mask. Mrs. Patel stopped me one afternoon as I watered the front garden. Marjorie, dear, is it true Bianca left you with nothing? She sounded almost relieved, as though my misfortune made her own worries lighter. I smiled faintly, setting down the watering can. She and her husband have big plans overseas, I said softly. They needed the money. Oh, how awful, she murmured. You know, if you need bread or milk, I can bring some over. Her kindness was genuine, but it pierced me all the same. She saw me as fragile, pitiable, someone to be rescued. Little did she know that under her very feet, I owned more property than anyone on this block. One evening, I walked past Harborview Towers. Deliberately, my shawl wrapped tightly against the autumn wind. Lights glowed warmly in the windows above, and I imagined Bianca laughing inside, convinced she had cut me out of her life for good. She had no idea that the walls around her were mine, that the mortgage, the elevators, the very concrete beneath her feet belonged to me. The irony tasted sharp as lemon on my tongue. I stood there for a long moment, watching the doorman greet tenants, listening to the hum of traffic. Asha Patel passed by and asked if I was lost. No, I said, forcing a gentle smile. Just remembering. When I returned home that night, I poured myself a small glass of Gerald's favorite bourbon. I raised it toward the mantel where his photograph stood. They believe I am powerless, Gerald. Let them think so. The longer they underestimate me, the stronger my hand becomes. And in that quiet kitchen, with the bourbon burning down my throat, I felt the faintest thrill of triumph. The day came when Elena placed a new set of papers into my hands. Her eyes carried both caution and resolve. Mrs. Hale, you now hold full control of Harborview Towers. It is legally yours. If you wish, we can file eviction notices against any tenant, including your daughter and her husband. The weight of the documents pressed against my palm. For a moment, I hesitated. Bianca was still my child, the girl I had once rocked to sleep in a crib lined with handmade quilts. But then I remembered her cold voice over the phone. I already sold your beach house. Goodbye. The memory hardened my resolve. Yes, Elena. Send the notice. 30 days. Nothing more. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of envelopes waiting for delivery. The one addressed to Bianca Mercer seemed to glow like a hot coal among the rest. I pressed my finger against it, imagining her face when she opened the letter, when she realized that the building she called hers had always belonged to me. The irony was almost unbearable. News of Nolan's troubles reached me before it reached her. Aurora, a woman from the neighborhood who had a brother at the bank, whispered it while we stood in line at the bakery. Nolan took out loans with false collateral. The bank is closing in. I only nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, my heart thrummed like a drum. Sure enough, weeks later, Bianca returned from Europe in disgrace. Aurora spotted her first, dragging a single battered suitcase through the airport alone. Nolan had stayed behind, rumors said, chasing another woman and leaving Bianca with his debts. By the time she reached her apartment door, the eviction notice had already been delivered. Mom, I need to talk to you. Her voice cracked over the phone, desperate in a way I had never heard before. Of course, honey. Come home. When she arrived at my doorstep, her eyes were hollow, rimmed with sleepless nights. She tried to smile, but it collapsed into a sob as soon as she crossed the threshold. The sight of her broken and small twisted something in my chest. But I reminded myself, this was necessary. Without consequences, there would be no reckoning. She sat at the kitchen table, the very place where I had spread Gerald's empire like a map of war. Her hands shook as she spoke. Nolan left me. He lied about everything. The debts are in my name. I have nothing, Mom. I poured her tea in silence, watching her eyes dart around the familiar room, as if searching for the mother she had abandoned. I'm so sorry for how I treated you, she whispered. Please let me stay here, just until I find work. Of course, honey, I said, gently masking the fire that burned beneath my ribs. This will always be your home. She believed me. She believed she had finally found refuge. But what she did not know was that her fall had only just begun. Bianca moved into her old bedroom the next morning, carrying only 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. I watched her unpack folding wrinkled blouses into drawers where years ago I had tucked away dolls and schoolbooks. The humiliation clung to her like a second skin. She had gone from luxury apartments and foreign trips to the same 4 walls where she once studied her spelling words. The first week she stayed quiet, sleeping late, and staring at the ceiling, as if she could will herself into another life. But bills and debt collectors do not wait for self-pity. Soon, she began pacing the kitchen, muttering about interviews, applications, and rejection letters. Employers glanced at her credit history and turned her away before she could even sit down. Finally, she landed a night job cleaning offices downtown. When she came home after the first shift, her feet swollen and her blouse damp with sweat, she collapsed into the chair across from me. I poured her coffee, watching her hands tremble as she lifted the cup. "It's honest work, Mom," she said with a bitter laugh. "I never thought I'd be scrubbing bathrooms at 41. Honest work is nothing to be ashamed of," I replied softly. But inside, I knew this was the first stone of her reckoning. One evening, while she rummaged through her box of belongings, she paused and held up a smaller envelope. "Mom, this was among Nolan's things. It has your name on it." My breath caught. Gerald's handwriting. A second envelope. I opened it carefully, my heart pounding. Inside was a short letter and a small brass key. "Dearest Marjorie, if you are reading this after the first envelope, it means our daughter is facing dark times. This key opens safety deposit box number 247 at the downtown bank. Inside is something to help, but use it wisely." Bianca's eyes lit up with desperate hope. "A deposit box? Maybe there's money. Maybe it can save me." The next day, we went to the bank together. The clerk verified my ID and brought us to a narrow room where the heavy steel door swung open with a groan. Inside the box lay velvet pouches filled with jewelry, emerald rings, pearl necklaces, gold bracelets, heirlooms I had never seen before. Robert's family treasures, preserved in secret. Bianca gasped, her fingers trembling as she lifted a necklace into the light. "Mom, this must be worth a fortune. We can sell these, pay off the debts, start over." I studied her face, hungry and pleading, and felt the ache of a truth I could not yet reveal. She still thought in terms of escape of money as a quick fix. She had not yet learned. "Are you sure you want to use your father's inheritance to clean Nolan's mess?" I asked quietly. "What choice do I have, Mom?" she cried. "If I don't, the banks will take everything." She could not see the irony. The house she feared losing was mine. The jewels she wanted to sell were only a fraction of what I held in silence. I let her take them home. I let her lay them across the kitchen table, whispering calculations, bargaining with herself. Because some lessons must be lived before they can be learned. The following week became a blur of numbers and negotiations. Bianca spread the jewels across the kitchen table every evening, calculating which pieces might fetch enough to cover Nolan's most urgent debts. She scribbled figures into a notebook, her handwriting shaky but determined. One afternoon, she returned from the pawn shop, pale and hollow-eyed. "They offered me $180,000, she muttered, dropping a wad of cash on the table. "Less than I hoped, but enough to keep the banks from seizing everything." I stared at the glinting bills at the jewels now reduced to mere currency. Gerald had preserved those heirlooms for generations, and in a single stroke, Bianca had bartered them for scraps of peace. Yet I said nothing. To scold her now would serve no purpose. She needed to feel the sting of her own decisions. That evening, as she sorted through debt, notices the phone rang. It was Mr. Holden. "Mrs. Whitmore, I have important news. We've uncovered more about Nolan's finances." I stepped into the hallway, lowering my voice. "Tell me." "His debts are worse than expected, over 200,000 spread across banks and private lenders. And several loans were signed with forged documents using Bianca's name. We have proof of fraud and coercion. With this evidence, your daughter can be freed from legal responsibility." Relief coursed through me, though I masked it with caution. "How long will it take?" 3 weeks, maybe a month if the courts move quickly. "But the investigation is costly, 50,000 in legal fees." "Do it," I said firmly. "Spare no effort. But she mustn't know yet, not until the process is finished." "Understood." When I hung up, Bianca looked up from her pile of bills. "Who was that?" "Just the neighbor asking about her fence." I lied smoothly. Lying had become second nature. Days passed. Bianca grew thinner, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. She cleaned offices at night and spent her days chasing creditors, haggling for mercy. One evening, she sat at the table with her head in her hands. "Mom, I ruined everything. Dad would be so ashamed." Her voice cracked. And for the first time, I heard true remorse, not just desperation. "I sold your house. I sold his treasures. I abandoned you for a man who threw me away." I touched her hand gently. "Your father loved you, Bianca. He would want you to learn, not drown in guilt." She shook her head. "No, Mom. I have to carry this weight. I have to earn back what I destroyed." That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone with Gerald's documents spread before me. The irony struck deep. She believed we were two poor women scraping by, when in truth I held the power to erase her suffering with a single signature. But that was not the lesson. She had to crawl through the ashes before she could rise. Only then would my silence become her salvation. 2 weeks later, Mr. Holden called again. His voice carried a mixture of triumph and gravity. "Mrs. Whitmore, we've located Nolan. He's in Paris, trying to secure residency through a fraudulent marriage. And we have undeniable evidence documents he forged with Bianca's name. This will clear her completely." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. "Proceed quietly. She must not know until everything is settled." That evening, Bianca returned from her night shift. Her hands were raw from scrubbing floors, her blouse smelled faintly of bleach. She dropped into the chair and whispered, "Mom, I saw the bills again today. Even after selling Dad's jewels, it isn't enough. I don't know how much longer I can keep up." Her tears fell freely, but they were different now. No longer the shallow sobs of self-pity. These were the tears of a woman staring at her own reflection, finally seeing the cracks she had tried to ignore. I offered her tea in silence, the kind that comforts without words. The next morning, Aurora arrived with gossip that confirmed Holden's news. "Antonia, did you hear Nolan's in trouble with the banks? He took out loans on the apartment that wasn't his. Now the creditors are circling. People say he's vanished for good." Bianca overheard and paled. "He lied to me," she whispered. "All those nights he swore we were building a future, he was just drowning me in his debts." Her collapse was complete. For days, she moved like a ghost around the house, speaking little, eating less. Finally, one evening, she confessed, "Mom, I don't even care about the debts anymore. What breaks me is that I betrayed you for him. I sold our memories. I sold Dad's treasures. For nothing. It was the moment I had waited for. Genuine regret, not born of fear, but of conscience." I took her hand. "Sometimes, Bianca, life lets us fall, so we understand how to stand again. You are learning. That is what your father wanted." She clung to me not as a spoiled daughter begging for rescue, but as a humbled woman seeking redemption. And in that fragile embrace, I knew the time for truth was drawing near. 3 weeks later, Mr. Holden called with the words I had been waiting to hear. "Mrs. Whitmore, the case is resolved. The court accepted our evidence. Your daughter is officially cleared of all of Nolan's debts. She owes nothing." I let out a long breath. "Thank you, Mr. Holden. Prepare the documents. I'll bring her to your office." That night, I told Bianca, "Tomorrow we're meeting a lawyer who may help with your situation." Her eyes widened with fragile hope, then clouded with fear. "Mom, I don't have the money to pay anyone. Don't worry about that. Just come." The next morning, she dressed in her best blouse, though it hung loose on her thinner frame. At Mr. Holden's office, she sat rigid, bracing for more bad news. He handed her a thick folder. "Miss Whitmore, please read." She skimmed the papers, her face shifting from confusion to shock. "This says Nolan forged my signature. That I was a victim of fraud. That I don't owe anything." Her voice trembled. "But who paid for this investigation?" Mr. Holden glanced at me. My heart pounded. The time for pretense had ended. "Bianca," I said gently, "there's something you don't know. Your father left more than you ever imagined. Properties, investments, accounts, all in my name. I've known since the day you called me from the doctor's office." Her eyes widened. "You knew, and you let me suffer. You watched me clean floors, pawn jewelry, cry myself to sleep when you could have stopped it." Tears pooled in her eyes, not of desperation this time, but of raw betrayal. I nodded slowly. "Yes, because if I had rescued you too soon, you would never have learned. Money could patch your problems, but it couldn't heal your heart. You had to face the emptiness Nolan left you with. Only then could you understand the value of family respect and love." She dropped the papers onto the desk and wept openly. Not the selfish tears I once knew, but tears of recognition. "I abandoned you, Mom. I treated you like garbage. And still, you saved me." I held her hand steady and warm. "Not by giving you money, by letting you find your strength." And in that room, for the first time in years, I saw my daughter not as a burden, but as a woman, reborn.